The Alpha King rejected his own mate, while silently begging her to forgive him. The great winter arena had never been so full. Thousands of wolves stood beneath banners bearing the blackthorn crest. Elders occupied the stone terraces closest to the moon altar, while warriors lined the outer walls in polished armor. Every family had come to witness the winter gathering, a ceremony meant to unite the kingdom before the harshest season of the year. Instead, it became the day the kingdom watched love lose to fear. At the center of the arena stood Alpha Rowan Blackthorn. Beside him was the woman fate had chosen for him, Iris Ashwin. She wore no extravagant jewels, only the silver moon bracelet fastened around her wrist the day the moon goddess recognized their bond. She had never cared for crowns. She had only wanted the man standing beside her. Across the arena, Elder Garrick stepped forward, his voice carrying effortlessly through the silence. The kingdom deserves certainty. His sharp eyes settled on Rowan. Half the pack refuses to follow a Luna born outside an alpha bloodline. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Iris lowered her eyes. She had heard these whispers for months. Village healer's daughter. Not noble enough, not powerful enough. She had spent every day trying to prove that kindness could be stronger than bloodlines. It had never been enough. Rowan clenched his fists. For weeks he had argued with the council. For weeks he had refused every demand. But now, scouts had returned with reports that a neighboring alpha was gathering warriors near the border. If his own pack split apart now, thousands could die. Elder Garrick's final words echoed like a sentence. Reject her. Stabilize the kingdom. Bring her back after the rebellion ends. It sounded so simple, temporary, manageable. Rowan slowly turned toward Iris. Their eyes met. He didn't need to speak. She already understood. She saw the apology before the words ever came. His lips trembled almost imperceptibly. A silent plea. Please trust me. Just for a little while. For one impossible heartbeat. Iris wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe love could survive public humiliation. That promises, whispered with the eyes, mattered more than words spoken before an entire kingdom. Then, she looked around the arena. Thousands of faces waited. Not one stood for her. Not one voice defended the woman who had spent years tending the sick, feeding orphaned pups, and caring for widows during the long winters. In that moment, something inside her became very quiet. Rowan drew a slow breath. His voice was steady, too steady. I reject Iris Ashwin as my Luna. The arena erupted. Cheers thundered through the stone walls. Warriors raised their fists. The elders nodded with visible relief. The rebellion had ended before the first sword had been drawn. Only Iris remained perfectly still. She did not cry. She did not argue. She simply inclined her head once, as though every unanswered question in her heart had finally found its answer. While the crowd celebrated, no one noticed her fingers reaching for the silver moon bracelet around her wrist. No one, except the old palace librarian standing quietly beneath the western archway. He watched as Iris unclasped the bracelet with calm, unhurried hands. She didn't throw it down. She didn't break it. She simply held it in her palm for a long moment before closing her fingers around it. The old librarian's face drained of color. He had cataloged the history of the kingdom for over 50 years. He recognized farewell when he saw it. Across the arena, Rowan forced himself to acknowledge the cheering wolves surrounding him. He told himself this was only for a few days. The rebellion would settle. He would explain everything. He had already prepared a secluded estate where they could wait until the kingdom accepted her again. This wasn't the end. It was only a painful pause, but when he searched the crowd for Iris once more, she was already walking away. She never looked back, and for the first time, the Alpha King felt a fear that no battlefield had ever given him. Rowan did not celebrate. While the elders accepted congratulations and warriors filled the great hall with relieved laughter, the Alpha King slipped quietly through a side corridor of the palace. Every step echoed with urgency. He repeated the same promise to himself over and over. Just a few days. The rebellion is over. Then I'll bring her home. He had planned everything. A secluded estate hidden deep within the western forests, trusted guards who answered only to him, fresh horses waiting beyond the palace gates. He imagined Iris angry, heartbroken, perhaps unwilling to speak to him at first. He deserved that, but once she understood, surely she would see that he had sacrificed their happiness to save thousands of lives. Surely she would understand. That hope carried him all the way to the Luna Wing. He pushed open the carved oak doors without knocking. Iris, silence, answered him. The sitting room was perfectly arranged. Her favorite blanket still rested neatly across the window seat. The teapot she had used that morning remained on the small wooden table, one cup untouched. A candle flickered quietly beside an embroidery frame, stretched with unfinished blue thread. The last flower she had been stitching would never bloom. A strange uneasiness settled over Rowan. Iris. He walked into the bedroom. The wardrobe doors stood open. Most of the royal gowns still hung inside. The jeweled crowns remained untouched. Necklaces, gifted by neighboring kingdoms, glittered beneath the candlelight. She had taken almost nothing. Only the simple dresses she had owned before becoming Luna. Her mother's old cloak was gone. So was the small leather satchel she carried whenever she visited sick villagers. The room looked less like someone had fled and more like someone had quietly returned, borrowed belongings before leaving forever. Then Rowan noticed the folded letter resting neatly in the center of the bed. His name appeared on the front in handwriting he would have recognized anywhere. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. There were no tear stains, no angry scratches across the page, only steady ink. You chose the people who doubted me, so I'll choose the place where I never have to prove my worth. Rowan's breathing slowed. His eyes continued reading. Please don't look for me. If you truly loved me, you'll let the woman you rejected finally find peace. The letter slipped from his hands. No. He shook his head. No, this isn't what we agreed. Except they had never agreed to anything. He had asked her to trust him with nothing more than a desperate look across a crowded arena. Outside, hurried footsteps approached. Captain Aldrin entered the chamber and stopped the moment he saw Rowan's face. My king, seal every gate. Rowan's voice cracked. Send riders north, south, every road. She couldn't have gone far. Within minutes, the palace exploded into motion. Royal scouts saddled horses. Messengers raced through the capital. The harbor was searched before dawn. Every traveler leaving the city was questioned. Servants searched every hidden garden Iris had ever loved. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a scent, not a witness who had seen which road she had taken. It was as though the earth itself had hidden her from the man who suddenly realized how completely he had underestimated her resolve. As the first light of morning spread across the horizon, Rowan stood at the palace gates, staring toward the empty road. For the first time since becoming Alpha, he understood that the most dangerous silence was not the one inside a battlefield. It was the silence left behind by someone who had already decided never to come back. The rebellion ended 13 days later, just as the elders had promised. The wolves who had threatened to leave the kingdom pledged their loyalty once more. Trade resumed along the southern border. The neighboring Alpha withdrew his warriors after realizing Blackthorn remained united. The kingdom celebrated peace. Rowan felt nothing. The first order he gave after the final treaty was signed had nothing to do with taxes, borders, or rebuilding. Find Iris. Captain Aldrin bowed immediately. Every scout, every scout, every tracker, every tracker. No limit on supplies, no limit on distance. Bring her home. And so the greatest search in the kingdom's history began. Elite trackers followed every mountain trail Iris had ever walked. Messengers rode to neighboring packs carrying sketches of her face. Healers' sanctuaries were visited one by one. Villages were questioned. Monasteries opened their gates to royal scouts. Every answer ended the same way. No one had seen her. Weeks became months. Months became years. The maps inside the war room slowly filled with colored pins, marking every place the search parties had traveled. The pins spread across forests, across deserts, across kingdoms. Eventually, they reached the sea. Every time Captain Aldrin returned, Rowan asked the same question before hearing any other report. Did you find her? Every time, Aldrin lowered his eyes. I'm sorry, my king. At first, Rowan blamed the scouts. Then, he blamed chance. Eventually, he blamed himself. The council urged him to move forward. The kingdom needs a Luna, Elder Garrick insisted during one royal meeting. The people need an heir. Rowan didn't even look at him. The kingdom had a Luna. I failed her. I won't fail another woman by pretending my heart is available. The discussion ended there. No one dared raise the subject again. The Luna Wing remained exactly as Iris had left it. The unfinished embroidery still rested beside the window. The teacup remained on the table. Every week, fresh wildflowers appeared in a crystal vase beneath the window. Most servants assumed the palace maids replaced them. They were wrong. Rowan gathered them himself during his early morning rides. White lilies, bluebells, wild lavender, the same flowers Iris had always loved. He arranged them carefully before anyone else in the palace awoke. It became the one promise he never failed to keep. Years passed. The flowers changed with the seasons. The room never changed at all. One stormy evening, Captain Aldrin arrived, carrying a weathered sailor's map. His expression held something Rowan hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. A merchant ship returned from beyond the northern sea. Rowan stood so quickly, his chair fell backward. They met a traveling healer. The room fell silent. Captain Aldrin unfolded the map. The description: a woman with silver-gray eyes. Exceptional knowledge of medicine. She refused payment. Rowan's heart pounded. Where is she now? Aldrin's hopeful expression slowly faded. The ship had arrived weeks too late. The healer had already departed. No one knew her name. No one knew where she had gone next, only that she had continued sailing east. The trail vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Rowan stared at the map until the ink blurred before his eyes. Somewhere beyond the sea, someone who sounded exactly like Iris had existed, and once again, he had arrived too late. Beyond the northern sea, no one knew the name, Iris Ashwin. The woman who stepped onto the weathered docks of a distant kingdom carried only a worn leather satchel, a healer's pouch, and a small bundle of clothes. When the dockmaster asked her to write her name in the traveler's ledger, she paused. Her fingers hovered over the page. Then she wrote only one word: May. No family name, no royal title, no trace of the Luna who had once stood beside a throne. She folded the ink-stained quill back onto the desk and quietly walked into a life where no one expected her to become anything except herself. It was harder than she had imagined. There were nights she slept beneath abandoned wagons because she could not afford a room. Days when she traded herbal remedies for a loaf of bread. Weeks when exhaustion became so familiar that she no longer noticed it. Still, she never turned back. One village had lost nearly every healer to a plague. May stayed until the fever broke. Another town had been destroyed by a border war. She helped rebuild homes before quietly leaving again. When famine swept through the western valleys, she organized kitchens from empty churches and abandoned barns, making certain children ate before anyone else. People tried to pay her. She almost always refused. "If you have enough to feed your family," she would say with a gentle smile, "then you've already thanked me." Word spread, not about a famous physician, about a woman who appeared when hope was disappearing. Some called her the wandering healer. Others simply called her May. She accepted every name except the one she had left behind. On quiet evenings, she still touched the place where her moon bracelet had once rested, not because she wished to return, but because some scars remained tender even after they had healed. She no longer dreamed about the palace. She dreamed about tomorrows. Patience. The child with the stubborn cough. The elderly shepherd whose failing eyesight frightened him. The young mother expecting twins before winter arrived. Purpose slowly replaced pain. One act of kindness at a time. Several years passed before anyone asked about her past. An elderly woman, watching May bandage an injured farmer, smiled knowingly. "You weren't always a traveling healer." May tied the final knot in the bandage. "No, you've lost someone." May's hands became still. "I did." "Your husband?" She looked toward the distant mountains beyond the village. "No, my future." The old woman reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. Neither spoke again. Some grief required silence, more than comfort. Late one autumn, a terrible storm trapped a family beneath the collapsed roof of their cottage. Without waiting for help, May crawled through broken beams to reach a frightened little girl pinned beneath the rubble. Hours later, soaked to the bone and bleeding from countless cuts, May carried the child safely outside. The villagers called her fearless. She quietly shook her head. That evening, as she tucked the exhausted girl into bed, the child reached for her hand. "Were you always this brave?" May smiled sadly. She brushed a strand of hair away from the little girl's face. "No, I was simply loved once." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the rain-streaked window. "And then I learned what it meant to survive after losing it." The child closed her eyes, comforted by the warmth in May's voice. But long after everyone else had fallen asleep, May remained awake, not because she missed the life she had left behind, because every person she healed reminded her that broken hearts could still choose to keep beating. 12 winters came and went. The palace changed with the passing years. Young guards, who had once watched Iris walk its halls, became captains. Children born after her disappearance grew into adults who knew her only as a story whispered by older servants. Only Rowan remained unchanged. Every spring, fresh wildflowers still appeared in the empty Luna wing. Every evening, one candle still burned beside the unfinished embroidery. Some grief learned to live quietly. It never truly left. One cold afternoon, the palace gates opened for an elderly sailor carrying a weathered wooden box tucked beneath his arm. His beard had turned completely white, and years at sea had bent his back. Yet he refused every offer of assistance. "I've come to see the Alpha King," he said. "The journey has taken me longer than I hoped." Captain Aldrin escorted the old man into the throne room. Rowan looked up from a stack of royal documents. The sailor bowed respectfully before placing the box on the polished floor. "A healer entrusted this to me many years ago." His voice was rough from salt air and age. "She told me to deliver it only after she was gone." The room grew still. Rowan's heart began pounding against his ribs. "What healer?" The old sailor looked at him with quiet sympathy. "She called herself May." He paused. "But I believe, once upon a time, she answered to another name." Slowly, Rowan knelt before the box. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside lay carefully stacked journals tied with faded blue ribbon. Bundles of pressed wildflowers rested between the pages, medical sketches, maps marked with tiny handwritten notes, and one sealed envelope. He recognized the handwriting before he touched it. Iris. The room seemed to disappear. His fingers shook so violently that Captain Aldrin stepped forward, worried the king might collapse. Rowan broke the seal. The first line stole the air from his lungs. "If you're reading this, then my journey has already ended." He closed his eyes. No, not this. Not after 12 years. He forced himself to continue. "Please don't mourn the years we lost. They became the years that saved thousands of lives." A tear slipped silently onto the page. "I forgave you long ago. I only hope that one day you forgive yourself." As he reached the end of the letter, something small slid from the folded parchment and landed softly in his palm. A silver moon bracelet. The very bracelet Iris had removed the night he rejected her. He stared at it in stunned silence. She had carried it with her all those years, not as a symbol of the life she wanted back, but as proof that some chapters deserved to be remembered, even after they had ended. The old sailor quietly lowered his head. "She passed away last winter, peacefully. She was smiling. She asked only one thing of me." Rowan swallowed painfully. "What was it?" "She said," the sailor's voice softened, "tell him not to waste another day looking behind him. There are still people ahead who need him." The throne room remained silent. Rowan held the bracelet against his heart. The woman he had spent 12 years searching for had finally returned to him. Not in person, only through the life she had left behind. He looked back into the wooden box. The journals suddenly felt impossibly heavy, because somewhere inside those pages waited 12 years of a life he had never been allowed to share. Rowan did not sleep that night. The wooden box remained open on the desk in the Luna Wing, exactly where Iris had once embroidered flowers beside the window. One by one, he untied the faded blue ribbon and opened the journals she had filled during the 12 years they had lived apart. The first pages were not about heartbreak. They were about patience. Today a little boy survived a fever no one believed he could overcome. An old shepherd finally smiled after walking without pain. A young mother named her daughter Hope. There was no bitterness in the ink, only gratitude. Rowan turned another page. Maps marked with tiny circles showed 6 different kingdoms. Each circle represented a traveling clinic Iris had founded. Beside every location, she had written the names of local healers she had trained before moving on. She had never stayed long. She had made certain others could continue the work after she left. Another journal described the winter famine in the western valleys. Rather than flee, Iris had gathered abandoned children inside an empty monastery, teaching the oldest how to cook, while the youngest learned their letters beside the fire. She had written only one sentence beneath the sketch of the crowded room. No child learns well on an empty stomach. Rowan pressed his hand against his mouth. He could almost hear her saying those words. The next journal held lists instead of stories. Medicinal herbs, treatments, names of apprentices. At the bottom of one page, she had added a quiet note. Teach everything you know. Knowledge locked away cannot heal anyone. Hours passed unnoticed. Sunrise slipped through the palace windows as Rowan reached the final journals. He discovered letters from villages thanking the mysterious healer called May. One elder wrote that an entire town still existed because she had refused to abandon plague victims when everyone else had fled. Another letter came from a young woman who had once been an orphan. You taught me to read. Now I teach others. Your kindness keeps traveling farther than you ever will. Rowan closed his eyes. He had spent 12 years imagining Iris alone. Instead, she had been surrounded by lives she quietly transformed. She had never built a palace. She had built hope. Near the end of the final journal, he found the only page that mentioned him. The words were small, almost hesitant. Today someone asked whether I ever regretted leaving. I told them no, not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally learned that loving someone should never require disappearing inside yourself. A tear landed on the page. Rowan did not wipe it away. He kept reading. I stopped searching for the life I lost. So I started creating one. He whispered the words aloud. They echoed through the empty room. For the first time, he understood that Iris had not survived because she forgot the past. She survived because she refused to let it become her entire future. As he gently closed the last journal, something caught his attention. Several pages near the back had never been filled. Only the final sheet held a few unfinished lines. The ink faded abruptly, as though the writer had grown too weak to continue. Rowan reached out with trembling fingers. Whatever Iris had tried to say in her final moments remained waiting on that last, unfinished page. Rowan stared at the unfinished page until sunrise. The final lines were written in a weaker hand than the rest, the letters uneven, as though every word had demanded more strength than the one before it. If these pages ever reach you, the sentence ended there. No farewell, no final request, no explanation. Just silence. For years, Rowan had imagined what he would say if he ever found Iris again. He had rehearsed apologies during lonely rides through the forest. He had imagined falling to his knees, begging for another chance. Now he understood something that broke his heart all over again. Some conversations belonged only to dreams. Reality had already chosen its ending. He carefully closed the journal and carried the wooden box to the center of the Luna wing. Morning light poured through the tall windows, illuminating the unfinished embroidery that had remained untouched for 12 years. He looked around the quiet room. This place had become a shrine to his regret. It was time to transform it into something worthy of Iris's life instead. That afternoon, Rowan summoned the royal council. The elders expected another meeting about trade or border disputes. Instead, the Alpha King stood before them, holding Iris's journals. This wing will no longer remain empty. Several council members exchanged confused glances. Elder Garrick frowned. You intend to choose another Luna? Rowan met his gaze steadily. No, I intend to honor the woman this kingdom failed. The room fell silent. He placed the journals upon the council table. From this day forward, the Luna Wing will become the Ashwin Institute, a school where healers will study without paying a single coin. Every child with the gift to heal will be welcome. Noble or common, no bloodline will ever decide who is worthy of serving others. The words struck the chamber like thunder. Several elders immediately protested. The royal treasury cannot support such generosity. It will cost a fortune. It has never been done. Rowan listened without interrupting. Then he answered quietly. It has. He rested one hand upon Iris's journals. One woman crossed 6 kingdoms, proving exactly how much a healer could change the world. If she could do that alone, imagine what hundreds could do together. No one had a reply. Construction began before the week ended. The royal chambers where Iris had once lived became classrooms filled with shelves of medicinal books. Guest rooms transformed into dormitories for students arriving from distant villages. The grand reception hall became the largest healing library on the continent. Above the entrance, Rowan ordered a stone inscription carved in letters of white marble. Healing is another way of loving people you'll never meet. It had been Iris's favorite saying. When advisors suggested naming the institute after the Alpha King instead, Rowan simply shook his head. It was never my legacy. It was always hers. Months later, the doors of the Ashwin Institute opened for the first time. Young men and women entered carrying notebooks instead of noble titles. Some came barefoot, some arrived with patched clothing. Every one of them was welcomed exactly the same way. As Rowan watched the first class disappear into the halls that had once echoed with Iris's quiet footsteps, he felt something inside him finally begin to loosen. He could never return the years he had taken from her, but perhaps he could spend the years he had left ensuring her kindness never disappeared from the world again. The Ashwin Institute grew faster than anyone had imagined. Within its first year, students arrived from every corner of the continent. Some came from wealthy packs dressed in fine wool cloaks. Others arrived carrying everything they owned in a single worn satchel. Inside the institute, none of that mattered. Every student learned in the same classrooms. A shepherd's daughter studied beside an alpha's son. An orphan practiced herbal medicine beside the child of a noble family. For the first time in the kingdom's history, worth was measured by compassion instead of bloodline. Rowan visited often, never with royal fanfare, never with guards announcing his arrival. He preferred to walk the halls quietly, watching young healers bend over books, mix medicines, and comfort frightened patients in the training clinic. Sometimes they recognized their king, sometimes they didn't. He found that he liked those days best. One spring afternoon, a young apprentice rushed past, carrying a basket of fresh herbs. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," the boy gasped. Rowan smiled and picked up the bundle of lavender that had fallen to the floor. "No harm done." He handed it back. "Someone is waiting for that medicine." The apprentice bowed gratefully before hurrying away. Rowan watched him disappear down the corridor. Years ago, he would have admired the discipline of a soldier. Now, he admired the urgency of someone trying to save another life. Outside the institute, a long line of villagers waited patiently. Some had traveled for days. An elderly woman suffering from failing eyesight. A little girl with a badly healed arm. A pregnant mother frightened about her first child. Every patient was treated. No one was turned away because they were poor. The institute had become exactly what Iris would have wanted. Hope with open doors. As the seasons passed, the institute's graduates spread across the continent. They established small clinics in forgotten villages. They crossed dangerous mountain passes, carrying medicine through winter storms. They stayed where others were afraid to go. People began calling them Ashwin healers, not because of where they had studied, but because of how they served. One autumn morning, Rowan returned to the institute after receiving reports that its 1,000th healer had completed their training. The celebration was simple, just as Iris would have preferred. Children sang. Teachers embraced former students. The oldest villagers smiled through grateful tears. As Rowan wandered through the courtyard, he noticed a little girl standing before the bronze statue of Iris that now overlooked the gardens. The child couldn't have been older than 8. She looked up at him with innocent curiosity. "Your Majesty." He knelt so they were eye to eye. "Yes?" She pointed toward the statue. Who was Iris Ashwin? For a moment, Rowan couldn't answer. His gaze lingered on the sculpted face that captured the gentle smile he had once believed he would see every morning for the rest of his life. At last, he spoke. "She was the bravest person I've ever known." The little girl tilted her head. Was she a queen? Rowan smiled sadly. No, she became something much greater. The child looked back at the statue, thoughtful. Then she smiled. "I want to grow up and help people like she did." Rowan felt tears sting his eyes. In that quiet moment, he realized the greatest monument to Iris had never been the statue. It was the countless hearts she continued to inspire, even in people who had never known her name. Age came quietly to Alpha Rowan Blackthorn. The dark hair that had once made young warriors admire him turned silver at the temples. The strength that had carried him through countless battles softened into the steady pace of a ruler who had finally learned that wisdom often walked slower than pride. Yet one tradition never changed. Every spring, on the morning the first wildflowers bloomed, Rowan left the palace alone. He carried no royal banner, no guards followed, only a small bundle of fresh, white lilies wrapped in linen. His destination remained the same every year, a lonely cliff overlooking the northern sea. It was there, according to the elderly sailor, that Iris's ashes had been scattered, just as she had requested before her final breath. The waves crashed gently against the rocks below. The wind carried the scent of salt and distant rain. Rowan knelt near the edge of the cliff and placed the lilies upon the grass. For a long while, he said nothing. He had spent too many years wishing for another chance. Now, he simply gave thanks. "Hello, Iris." His voice was softer than the wind. The Institute welcomed another class this spring. He smiled faintly. "They're better healers than I ever hoped. A little girl told me she wants to become just like you." His eyes drifted toward the endless sea. "I think you would have liked her." Silence answered him. Not the lonely silence that had haunted him after her disappearance. A peaceful one, as though the ocean itself had accepted the words he no longer expected anyone else to hear. Back at the palace, the Ashwin Institute had become the greatest center of healing on the continent. Its graduates crossed kingdoms without asking who deserved help. They treated strangers as neighbors. They healed enemies alongside friends. Above the entrance, Iris's words continued welcoming every student who walked through its doors. Healing is another way of loving people you'll never meet. Generations of healers memorized the sentence before they ever learned their first remedy. Many knew the quote. Few knew the woman behind it. And perhaps that was exactly how Iris would have wanted it. She had never sought to be remembered, only to leave the world gentler than she had found it. When Rowan grew too old to travel, the young healers visited him instead. They brought stories from distant villages, a plague contained before it spread, a child saved after a difficult birth, a mountain community surviving winter because a traveling clinic had arrived just in time. Each story reminded him that Iris had never truly disappeared. She lived on in every hand that chose compassion over convenience. On the final evening of his life, Rowan asked to be taken to the palace gardens. He looked toward the western sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Captain Aldrin, now old himself, stood quietly beside him. "My king, do you have any regrets?" Rowan smiled with the calm honesty that only time can teach. "I spent years searching the world for the woman I loved." He paused. "I never realized. She had already become home for thousands of strangers." He closed his eyes, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. History remembered Alpha Rowan Blackthorne as a wise king, not because he never made mistakes, but because he spent the rest of his life making sure no one else had to suffer from the same one. And history remembered Iris Ashwin, not as the Luna who was rejected, but as the healer who proved that a broken heart could still mend an entire world. Sometimes love does not return. Sometimes it becomes something even greater, a legacy that keeps healing people long after both hearts have stopped beating.